My Playful Wife, Episode 18, The Summer, written by Mia. Summer arrived with its usual lack of apology. In Delhi, summer is not a season so much as a state of siege. The heat does not come, it occupies. It presses in from every direction at once, off the walls and up from the pavement and down out of a white, exhausted sky, until the city reorganizes itself entirely around the single priority of not dying of it. The shifted hours, the drawn curtains, the whole rhythm of life bent around the few bearable margins of the day, the early morning and the late night, with the long, murderous middle given up for lost. People who have not lived through it do not believe the descriptions. People who have do not need them. The flat, which had always been adequate to our purposes, became in May a small and improvised climate system unto itself. The AC laboring in the bedroom, the one room we could make habitable, so that the bedroom became the country we lived in, and the rest of the flat its harsh, surrounding territory. The fan in the kitchen pushing the hot air around without much conviction. The particular intimacy that the heat enforces on two people, the way it drives you into the same cooled room, onto the same side of the flat, into a closeness that is first practical, and then, somehow, more than practical. We were thrown together by the weather. We did not mind being thrown. We cooked simpler things. The 2-day spreads were impossible. The kitchen in May was no place to spend 2 days. We ate cooling foods, curd and cucumber and cold leftover things, and drank more water than seemed possible, and slept earlier because the days exhausted you simply for being endured. And on the evenings when the power held, it did not always hold. The grid in a Delhi summer is a thing you pray to. We went out onto the balcony after 8, when the temperature finally dropped from impossible to merely unpleasant, and sat in the dark with cold things sweating in our hands, and talked, or didn't, and watched the city try to cool itself 1 degree at a time. I had started writing. Not stories. Nothing with ambition behind it, nothing meant for any eye. Just notes, a habit that had grown over the months, out of the same root that had once sent me to the gym in the worst of the year. The need to put a thing outside myself, so I could look at it. The need to make the internal tangible, to get the weather of my own head out into the air where it could be examined and, sometimes, survived. I kept a notebook on the kitchen table, the same kind Saloni used for her designs, the plain ruled ones she bought in bulk, which felt right, the two of us scratching at the same kind of paper in our different alphabets, and I wrote in it when a feeling got large enough to require the relief of language. It had become, by that summer, a real practice. I did not always know what I thought about a thing until I had written it down. The writing was not the record of the thinking, but the thinking itself. The way Saloni's hands did not execute a design she'd already finished in her head, but found the design in the act of making. I wrote about the year. Mostly, still it was a deep well, and I was nowhere near the bottom of it. But I had begun lately to write about the present too. The ordinary present. The summer. The cold thing in my hand on the balcony. The specific way the woman beside me had of going quiet that was not absence. She saw the notebook one morning and looked at me with an expression of frank surprise. "Since when?" she said. "A few months," I said. She looked at the notebook on the table. She did not reach for it. This is a thing I want to record about my wife, because it is one of the truest things about her. She respected the privacy of notebooks absolutely, having one of her own, knowing what it is to keep a place where you say the things you cannot otherwise say. She would no more have opened my notebook than I would have opened hers, and we had each, that year, had things in our notebooks that would have changed the others whether to read. There is a kind of trust that is built out of the doors you choose not to open. We had a great deal of it. "Good," she said. "Only that." But she said it the way she said the things she meant. The worst of the summer brought the power cuts, and the power cuts brought us, of all places, to the roof. There was a night in the last week of May when the grid gave out around 11, the AC dying with a long descending groan, the fan stopping, the dark going instantly thick and close, and the bedroom, our one habitable country, became within minutes uninhabitable. We lay in the heat, while pretending it would come back. It did not come back. And then Saloni sat up in the dark and said, "Roof," in the tone of a woman who has solved a problem, and took my hand, and we climbed the 2 flights with a bedsheet and 2 pillows and a bottle of water. The way half the building was doing the same, you could hear them, doors opening, feet on the stairs, the whole vertical village migrating upward to find whate'er there was. The roof was already half full when we got there. This is a thing about Delhi that no one tells you, and everyone who lives there knows, that the worst nights make the best communities, that a failed grid puts a whole building on its roof under one sky. Families on charpais and bedsheets, the old uncle from the second floor who never speaks nodding at you in the dark, children who should have been asleep hours ago running between the water tanks. We found a corner. We spread the sheet. We lay on our backs on the warm concrete and looked up. There were stars, faintly, what the city's glow allowed of them. The heat sat on us, but the air at least moved a little up there, the small mercy of a height. My mother used to do this, Saloni said, beside me, her voice low so as not to travel. In the village before Delhi, the whole family on the roof in summer. She said the city had stolen the sky from people, that we used to sleep under it every night, and now we only see it when the power fails. A pause. She'd have liked that the failing gives it back. She liked things that came back. She did not often speak of her mother. I had learned not to reach for it too eagerly when she did, because the eagerness could close the door. I lay still and received it. "Tell me about her," I said, carefully. An open door, not a pull. And perhaps it was the dark, perhaps the roof, perhaps the mother already summoned by the sky. She did. She told me things I had not heard in 3 years of marriage. The way her mother sang while she cooked, a different song for each dish, so that you could tell what was for dinner from the next room by the tune. The way she had died, slowly, when Saloni was 19, the long, unfair erosion of it, the daughter learning to cook from a woman teaching with less breath each week, racing to hand down what she could before the handing down ran out. The recipes that were really her mother, the order of the diyas that was really her mother. The way half of what Saloni did with her hands was a dead woman still speaking through them. I listened in the dark on the warm roof and did not say much, because there was not much to say that would not have been smaller than the things she was giving me. I found her hand on the sheet between us and held it. "You've never told me most of that," I said eventually. "I know," she said. "You never used to be a person I'd tell it to. You'd have listened. You always listened. But you wouldn't have held it. You'd have heard it and set it down. Now you hold it." She turned her head toward me in the dark. "That's the difference. It's the whole difference between then and now. I can hand you the things that matter and trust you'll still be holding them in the morning." The power came back at 2, the building sighing electrically awake below us, lights blinking on across the colony. Nobody on the roof moved for a while. We had found, in the failure, something better than the comfort the grid provided, and we were all of us reluctant to climb back down into the cool dark and give it up. We went eventually, when the heat below had broken enough to allow it. But I lay awake after, in the restored cool, listening to her breathe, and understood that the summer, which I had been merely enduring, a siege to be survived, had been giving me something all along, the way the whole year had been giving me things while I thought it was only taking. The heat had driven us onto a roof, and the roof had given me her mother. You do not get to choose the form the gifts arrive in. Sometimes the gift is a failed grid and a warm slab of concrete and a woman finally telling you, at 34, about the songs her mother sang for each dish. Piyush called one Sunday in May with news. I knew it was news from the first syllable. There is a frequency a voice acquires when it is carrying something it has been waiting to set down, and Saloni knew it too. I watched her stand up straighter at the kitchen counter, the phone to her ear, the way you stand when something is arriving. He and Mira were engaged. Formal, done, complete in all its parts, the ring, the meeting of families, the date already set for December. He told it in a rush, the words tumbling. My brother who still loved things the way he had always loved them, fully and fast, and with the whole of himself thrown in. Saloni said the right things. She said them warmly, and she meant them. There was nothing false in her gladness. But I was watching her face, because watching her face is what I do now, and I saw it doing three things at once. The gladness on the top of it, real and bright, and underneath the gladness something more complicated, and underneath that something more complicated still, the layers of a woman receiving news that was wholly good and not, for her, wholly simple. When she hung up, she stood very still for a moment, the dead phone in her hand, looking at nothing. Then she turned to me, and she did not arrange her face first. That was the gift of where we had arrived, that she did not feel she had to compose herself before she let me see her. She turned with the full complicated truth of it still showing, unsimplified, trusting me to be able to look at the whole of it without needing it to be smaller. Congratulations are the right response, she said, carefully, as though laying out the facts of a thing for them both to look at. Yes, I said. I'm happy for them. I know you are. I'm also, she stopped. She looked for the word and didn't find a single one because there wasn't a single one. Several other things, she said, all at once. I don't have a clean name for any of them. I know that too, I said. And I did. I did not need it spelled out, and I would not have asked her to spell it out because some of what she was feeling was hers alone, belonged to a chamber of her that was not mine to enter, and the kindest and most loving thing I could do was to let her feel it without requiring her to translate it into something I could fully share. My brother, whom she had once, there is still no clean word, even now, for what they had been to each other, was marrying a woman in December, was closing, with that marriage, a door that had been, for a time, open, was choosing a whole future that could not, contain whatever the two of them had briefly been. That this was right did not make it weightless. A thing can be entirely right and still cost something to the person it is right for. I had learned that this year more thoroughly than I had learned anything. I had been the one it cost for so long. I knew the exact texture of a grief that has no grievance in it, a sadness that does not contradict your gladness, but rides alongside it, the two of them traveling together. The summer light lay heavy in the kitchen. The fan turned, pushing the warm air from one part of the room to another. "Does it get easier?" she said. She was not asking about this, specifically. She was asking about all of it, the ongoing labor of being the particular person she was, of holding the complicated shape of her own heart without letting it spill or harden, of feeling several things at once and being honest about all of them. She was asking the question I had been living inside for a year, and she was asking it of the one person who had no reason to lie to her about the answer. "I don't think it gets easier," I said. I had thought about this. I gave her the true thing rather than the comforting one, because she had not married me for the comforting things, not the new version of me she had married. I think it gets more familiar, which isn't the same. Easier would mean it stops costing something, And I don't think it ever stops costing something, the feeling everything, the not looking away. But familiar means you stop being afraid of it. You learn the shape of your own difficult feelings, and they stop frightening you, even when they still hurt. And I think familiar might actually be better than easier. Easier, you have to give something up. Familiar, you get to keep all of it and just carry it better. She nodded slowly, absorbing it, turning it over. "Come here," she said. I came. She put her arms around me, properly, fully, both arms, all the way around, the kind of embrace that is not comfort exactly and not desire exactly, but something larger that contains the elements of both and exceeds them. The kind you give someone when the feeling is too big and various to be expressed any other way, and the body has to do what the words can't. I held her back, the same way in the hot kitchen with the fan turning, and we stood there holding each other for a long time, longer than comfort would have required, two people in the middle of a marriage they had broken and rebuilt into something that could hold this, could hold a December wedding and all the several unnamed things at once, and not break. Outside, the summer, occupying the city. Inside, the two of us in our kitchen in the life we had built and broken and built again into something truer than the first version had ever been. "We should go to Bengaluru for the engagement," she said into my shoulder. "Properly. Be there for it." "Yes," I said. "We should." That night I wrote in the notebook, by the laboring breath of the AC, while she slept, "Piyush engaged. December." She felt several things at once and let me see all of them, unsorted. She asked, "Does it get easier?" I said, "It gets familiar, which is better." I believe that. A year ago, the difficult feelings could end me. Now, they're just whether I know how to dress for. We're going to Bengaluru. We're going to stand in a room and be glad for them, all the way glad, and carry the other things quietly, the way you carry the parts that are only yours. I closed the notebook and lay listening to the laboring AC and to her breathing, and thought about December. The wedding out there ahead of us the way the monsoon was out ahead of the summer, a thing that would arrive whether we were ready or not and would, when it came, change the weather entirely. We would go to Bengaluru and stand in the bright noise of it and be glad, all the way glad, for my brother and the woman with the noticing eyes. And we would carry the several other things quietly, folded small, the way you fold the clothes you are not wearing this season, but are not ready to give away. I was not afraid of the wedding. That was the true measure of how far we had come. A year before, the thought of standing in a room watching my brother marry would have been past bearing. Now it was only another room I would walk into beside my wife, and walk out of beside her, the two of us intact, carrying what was ours. To be continued in episode 19, What Piyush Built.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 18 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
I've Mia.
Thank you for listening.